Hello YouTube, Michael Constantine here. I wanted to suggest to people a few solutions for the affordable housing crisis. First off, we need to abandon traditional single family homes. The 2 and 3 and 4 and 5,000 square foot homes that families aim to buy oftentimes are too large, they're unsustainable from an environmental perspective and an energy standpoint. Secondly, it doesn't take much space to live or be happy. It takes space to store things. People have been very materialistic in the past, and going forward in the future, people are going to have to shed many things. It's not sustainable for people to hoard large amounts of possessions. What we need to do to accommodate the housing demand, we need to prevent investment groups from buying up single family homes. And we need to convert existing retail spaces that are closing, such as malls and department stores and tire shops and pharmacies like Walgreens and CVS that are going out of business, and other vacant industrial and commercial structures and spaces into sustainable housing. Smaller modular housing units that have been custom built to be accommodated by those spaces. There's all kinds of different ways that we can shelter people. And these huge commercial spaces that were bought for retail purposes in the past, or industrial purposes, could be cleaned and renovated and refurbished to accommodate large populations of people. I've seen huge malls go entirely vacant and sit that way for decades, and it's not practical at all. It's such a huge waste of a developed space, especially when there are parking lots associated with those commercial spaces. They could easily accomplish accommodating several thousand people or more. People are very flexible in how they live, and the great thing about living in a mall type space is that there'd be an enormous amount of walking to get back and forth to your house, which would be good for fitness. People would feel better having that exercise, and you'd have your stores revitalized and brought back to the point that people can walk right next door to go to the shopping. They can go to buy clothing, buy a phone, buy food. The retail marketplace will literally be almost at arm's length. People will be able to walk over there to those places very quickly. It'll allow people to socialize with each other without having to use social media as much. They won't have to drive a car to go and visit with each other. Something like an e-bike would be a lot more practical means of transportation when you're living in an environment where your retail space is only a quarter mile or a half mile away inside an enclosed, climate-controlled environment. I think that they'll be able to fit tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people inside of abandoned malls across America, perhaps even millions of people in the near future. And new communities will likely be built in such a capacity that you'll have future housing units and stores built in enclosed environments like that as a preferred mode of development, rather than having those homes built apart and having all the consumer liability for residents placed on the homeowner. You can have something more akin to rentals insurance on apartment type permanently owned homes inside of a large retail space, rather than having to purchase your own roof and all that. And the development that manages the property, similar to a homeowners association, would be responsible for replacing the roof for the community itself, either through some type of homeowners fees or renters fee, something like that, or just through taxes off the retail goods that are sold to the residents that live in that community. I think that that's probably going to be a good solution for housing people in the future. They're already working on doing this in many places. I've written about this a lot in the past. Tiny homes are also a good solution, but when I say tiny homes, I'm talking about spaces that are not more than a maximum of 300 or 400 square feet. People don't need enormous amount of space to live. That extra space is usually purchased to accommodate material possessions, things that they drag along with them. It's nice to have things, but having things in excess is difficult to manage. You need to have a purpose for those things that you have. It shouldn't just be something that sits as part of a collection. We all know what happens to collections. If they don't get passed down to somebody who's going to be able to maintain and take care of them, they end up getting sold off and auctioned and thrown in the trash can. And they end up in a landfill somewhere. And in a better case, they end up being recycled and repurposed for something else. Other options for single-family housing are renting in a green, sustainable community that does not have a utility bill. Let me explain how that would work. You would have a community-based solar or wind-powered or hydroelectric-powered power source. And rather than paying for electricity, the utilities would be covered by that renewable energy source. And people would just pay in, again, a homeowner's fee or some kind of renter's fee that would essentially provide you bulk coverage for your utility consumption. It's sort of like a socialism for utilities. You get a bulk rate discount rather than having to pay some outrageous electric bill for 3 or 4 or 5,000 kilowatts of cooling or heating. You just pay a lump sum utility rate and you use what you need rather than being gouged by a utility company for your individual utility contract. If they adopt that model, it will put a lot of utility providers out of business in the future. And it needs to happen. Those companies need to go out of business because they're exploiting their customers. A lot of them are very greedy, and they charge well in excess of what it actually costs to provide the electricity because they're trying to make a massive profit off of an essential service that people need. Other alternatives for tiny housing are custom-built tiny homes on flatbeds, and I like the idea of flatbed trailers with tiny homes, either travel trailers or a custom-built structure with hardy plank or sheet metal siding. I like that because if there's a disaster or civil unrest, you can quickly relocate. So I think that's a good option for a lot of people. But the only challenge comes in with having to relocate. When you have to relocate those structures, you have to have a vehicle with towing capacity sufficient to move them, and the larger ones cost quite a bit of money unless you build them yourself. They also weigh in the neighborhood of between 10 and 15,000 pounds for the larger tiny homes on wheels that you have to tow. Many people will buy things like a camper van or a coach bus or a school bus and convert it into a tiny home. And those are good options. But you've got mechanical maintenance you have to do with that, and you have some overhead involved. You need something that's insulated to accommodate a warmer climate and more extreme weather. During the wintertime, we're getting heavier snowfall, and during the summer, we're getting temperatures between 125 and 130 degrees now, and the heat indexes are far higher. So you need to plan for these things when you are looking at buying a tiny home or building one. You have to plan for a more hostile climate, where it's going to be hotter and drier in the summers than anything you've ever experienced, and potentially much colder alternatively in the winters in some places, or not having a winter anymore. So a lot to consider there, but I believe that tiny homes and repurposed commercial and industrial spaces are the future of housing. This fixed foundation stuff where houses are attached to the ground, unless they're built as earth surrounded homes, partially built underground. I think they call them earthbound homes. That's one phrase they use for it. It's really not practical to build above ground in a lot of places because of the flooding and wildfires and natural disaster. It's more practical to have a home, if you're not mobile, to have it earthbound. Build all or part of your house under the ground to insulate against extreme heat, extreme cold, natural disaster, and climate change. Like a hobbit hole. Yeah, like a hobbit hole. That's a really brilliant way to build, in my opinion. But make sure that when you build your tiny home underground, that you build on high ground, somewhere where the water is not going to be rushing down to where you're at. Because if it's going to be built below grade and you're in a place that's going to flood, it needs to be hermetically sealable with some kind of a undefeatable ventilation system that allows you to essentially have your home functioning as a snorkel to allow for air exchange above the water line. There are homes like that, believe it or not. People are building below sea level, under the sea, over in China and other parts of the world, in these capsule homes that are beneath the waves. That's a really practical way to build too, in my opinion. But you have to be able to withstand the tidal forces and the water pressure from the tide coming and going, and from people possibly hitting the home with a boat. It's got to be low enough below the water line that ships can't hit it, which means that you're going to have to be pretty deep underwater. And you have to have a way of getting back and forth to it as well. But the hobbit hole type home, earthbound homes, are actually a lot more sustainable. They're greener. You just have to worry about water permeation, water getting in from the soil, and mold and mildew. You can't have any cracks forming the wall. The walls for that underground home have to be very carefully prepared But if you do opt to live that way, you probably won't need air conditioner, because inside of those cave-like homes, the temperatures remain pretty constant. It's usually an average of 72 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really great because that means that your energy bill is going to be little or nothing. And you can effectively build something like that if you mound up enough dirt artificially too on flat ground, and then build within that mound of dirt. But they're doing that in Australia already in the outback. There's an entire town in one place that's built underground because their summers are so extraordinarily hot that it's just not practical to use air conditioner to cool those homes that they have there. So they have built down inside of a cave-like environment, and that's where the people live. And they come and go in that town within that cave system. People have lived that way in many parts of the world for a long time, and it shields them from extreme heat, extreme cold, and natural disasters. That's why it's such a preferential way to live. But the people who don't want you thinking about how you can live differently, options for how you can live more sustainably, are people who want to capitalize off of your housing needs. They market the single-family homes with 4 walls and a roof, usually composite shingle, as the preferred way of living. They treat something that's not built well like it's built like a castle. And most of those vinyl-sided homes aren't going to last you very long. Before long, you're going to notice pieces of your home falling off on the ground. I used to own such a home, and I had siding that would fall off. I was losing shingles. I had roof leaks. I didn't know much about housing back then. I know a lot more now. I'm not an expert, but I've done a lot of reading, explored on this. I've thought about this a lot. And you can do so much better buying a smaller, sustainable space that will allow you to keep your overhead down. Your utility costs especially, that's a flex cost that you can increase or decrease depending on your living space size and how well insulated you are and what's going on with the weather outside. The great thing about tiny homes is that most of them can be easily relocated. So if you find that an area that you're living in is having issues with sustainable water supply, or wildfire, or extreme heat, or there's some other major change occurring environmentally, like I said, you can just relocate. And that's a great solution, because issues that exist climatologically in one place may not exist in another. And I'll have more tips and more ideas to share with you later on my channel. I talk about many different topics to try to inspire changes. Thanks for listening. This is Michael Constantine. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you found it helpful, please give me a thumbs up. Have a good holiday.